A mass extinction approaches, but not because of a meteor or global warming. This time, the threat is AI, and in particular, large language models. In their crosshairs, hundreds of software vendors in the analytics industry. How can they survive? And what does this mean for you? Find out on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
This, my friends, is We Make Future, June 24th to 26th in Bologna. I'm so excited to be going back as a media partner and a speaker. I'll be giving this talk in Bologna on June 26th. Hope to see you there. One of the coolest countries in the world, Italy. I love Italy. Studied in Italy a long time ago. Or as I would say, ho studiato a Venezia tanto anni fa, ma ricordo niente perché ho bevuto troppo e birra e vino tutto il notte, which basically means we drank too much wine and beer every night. And I don't remember too much Italian, but I do remember a fair amount, and it was awesome. I mean, it's just a beautiful place. It's a place to go. And this is a big event. This is a big event. They were expecting tens of thousands of delegates at this show, so pretty excited about that. And then Riyadh, December 14th to 16th, then Milan in February, and back to Bologna in June of next year. So lots of big events planned. And with that, let me share my presentation review slideshow. Excellent. The death of analytics vendors, AI versus the analytics industrial complex. Yeah, okay, there's a bit of agitprop here, admittedly, but we're going to dive in and just examine what's going on because I think it is a very, very, very big deal. This is an inflection point, and the analytics vendors that adapt, that embrace AI are going to do fine. The ones that don't, not so much. So, seeing a mass extinction event is coming. It's not climate change or even a recession. It's not even open source. Although, if you've been tracking this industry like I do, you know that open source, in a certain sense, has been threatened. Look at Click buying Talend. Big deal there. And what did they do within a few weeks? They pulled the string on the open source Talend Data Studio. And lots of folks worried. They were like, oh no, this is a problem. We have all of our ETL going through this, or our ELT, or however they decided to build their solutions. But yeah, open source is threatened. It's still there. It's still a big deal. Apache is still a big deal. The Linux Foundation, all that good stuff. But let's face it, things are changing. And what happens when everyone can ask questions in plain English? Well, that's what the LLMs are about. But as my buddy Mark Madsen pointed out the other day, large language models model language. They don't model data. This is a very big difference, and we have to keep that in mind as we move forward. So analytics basically is becoming a feature. This is nothing new. I mean, think about it. Dashboards have been commoditized for years. BI interfaces, well, now they're conversational, and that's the way to go. That's probably one of the biggest themes in this talk today is natural language questioning. You could just ask questions in natural language. Again, that's not even new. I remember Progress Easy Ask, something like 25 years ago or so, came out with a solution where you could ask a question in natural language. It would build a SQL query for you that you could look at and then adjust and amend and kind of learn. So it's not a new thing, but it didn't take off as much as they might have hoped. But BI interface is conversational. Query generation is automated. A lot of times it's automated these days. Insights synthesized. So that moat that these analytics vendors had is in fact collapsing. So here's the traditional stack, of course, executives on top, ETL at the bottom, ETL, ELT, we had data virtualization, but warehouses not going away, also not going away. Pretty key part of hybrid search as they talk about it. Semantic layers, you're hearing all about semantics these days. Why? Well, because the AI tools need semantics if they're going to avoid hallucination. But a key point, as you can see on the slide there, lots of human mediation everywhere up and down the stack. A lot of manual time spent building these things, dealing with them, maintaining them. Maintenance is probably the hard part, right? As our buddy Sami Akbay would say, I look forward to fixing data pipelines today, said no one ever. It's just not a lot of fun to do that. He's got a pretty cool company to watch out for, Dagen.ai, Dagenai, short for data agent. So we'll talk about that at some point. Why analytics vendors became giants? Well, first of all, not too many people are really good at SQL. There are people who are excellent at it, but you need to know what to ask. You need to know how to ask it. You need to understand your landscape. You need to understand a lot of things. And of course, we have all these data silos. And what did the cloud become? Another big data silo, right? Then you had multiple clouds. They're all big data silos. So all these data federation activities we've done over the years, they're all trying to bring it all together. You know what AI does really well? As long as you feed it a fair amount of information, it can bring that stuff together dynamically. That's what you're going to see agents doing, is just little bits and pieces of grabbing this and grabbing that. Lots of vendors are talking about that these days. But in the old way, you have these expensive integration taxes. You have specialized experts needed. And governance, it's been fun watching governance kind of evolve and become a big deal the last 5 to 6 to 7 years or so. We talked about governance 20 years ago when you sort of kind of couldn't do it. I mean, you could govern access to the database, you could govern access to the application. Otherwise, there wasn't a whole lot of governance. It was pretty much in a manual that you hoped that someone would read. Well, the result is that it was expensive. It was expensive to use these business intelligence tools. So what's the big bottleneck? Dashboard sprawl. How many dashboards don't even get used? And I love when they move to a different vendor. It's like, okay, we have to redo all these dashboards. They send in the troops and spend weeks and months sometimes redoing dashboards that a lot of people don't even use. In the last few years, we've gotten better about tracking who's actually using these things and not worrying so much about the old estate, essentially. But that's a big deal. So report fatigue, people get tired of things, endless KPI debates, weeks to answer simple questions. That is no bueno. So ChatGPT, I like this concept. It's the iPhone moment for analytics. Remember the iPhone? Remember BYOD? That was the iPad, actually, if you go back in time. I remember this. I just met Dr. Robin Bloor, in fact, in the genesis of the Bloor Group. I went out to meet him, and he had a brand new iPad, and we were talking all about it and how BYOD changed a lot, because typically IT was like, oh, we're not going to support that. And the CEO walks in with his iPad and says, yeah, you are. So deal with it. And that's kind of what the LLMs are doing now. A lot of people on the IT side, or even smart people in governance, are like, whoa, hold on, guys. This stuff is dangerous. It hallucinates. It's going to cause you all kind of trouble. But it's here and it's coming. And to not try to use these technologies is really an error. It's a mistake. So now we have these zero-click interfaces. Just ask. Again, natural language questioning. That's a key takeaway. And we'll talk to Madsen after this presentation about his research in that space, because it's just words, right? And words are not a perfect replica of reality. We think they are. In our heads, we think they are because we have so much context in our heads. But in reality, language is very different from data. Language represents data, but language is not data per se. So old BI, build reports, takes weeks, learn interface, training required, static dashboards. Okay, you got to do a lot of filtering and clicking. The filtering is usually where people run into trouble, like with Tableau and some of these other interfaces. You just don't know to not select this or to select that. But, let's face it again, the LLM, ask questions, get answers, use language. Dynamic reasoning, I put that in quotation marks, it's really parsing. And frankly, that's one of the things that impresses me the most about the large language models these days, is their ability to parse instructions and follow orders. It's gotten a lot better too. It's amazing how fast these things are improving, because in the early days, it was pretty bad, especially with the image stuff. And still ChatGPT, if you try to get it to lay out a Word document, no bueno, not too good. But it is good at helping you create frameworks, at helping you take an abstract, for example, and come up with a litany of points. And it's interesting because if you think about what the LLMs are doing, they're basically leveraging these vector arrays. There's a vector universe out there where there's a vector for all these different tokens, cat, dog, different vectors. And the more context you give up to a point, the better results you're going to get. And I'll just share one of the most interesting things I've learned in the recent past. I had a gentleman on DM Radio from Perplexity. He's the AI infrastructure guy over there. And he was telling me if you use the new 200 chips instead of the 100 chips, you get better answers. Well, gosh, why is that? And the reason, I believe, is because with the faster chips, you can process more relationships and thus bring in more vectors and get a clearer view of what's actually happening, of the representation. But as Marcus said before, everything an LLM produces is technically a hallucination. Sometimes it's a very accurate hallucination. Sometimes it's not. Knowing the difference, well, that's pretty important stuff. So again, from static to dynamic, that's a big, big change. And the user experience has changed now, and people expect this, just like the iPhone changed all kinds of different things. All right, so the new workflow, old days, data, got to get a data model, build a dashboard, the analyst reviews it, gets it to the executives. Now, data, RAG, LLM, user, retrieval augmented generation. Agentic workflows actually is another way to do this. So the RAG models, I've heard people rag on RAG, basically saying it's really not getting you all the way there. It's probably getting you from 80% to 92 to 93%. Well, as I say to folks all the time or ask, what part of your business can be wrong 7% of the time? The answer is not a whole heck of a lot. Maybe marketing, maybe some different things for sure you can get away with. But yeah, by and large, you want to make sure that you're using all this stuff. All right, so let's keep on rocking and rolling. So what gets disrupted first? This slide I came up with, Mark had a slide just like this, and I used it. And I used it to, I just used ChatGPT to recreate it with one prompt. That's the modern data stack in the background, FYI. So what gets disrupted first? Well, dashboard factories, basic data visualization vendors, embedded analytics. I mean, everything is going to be embedded in the future. I think to a certain degree, or 80% is going to be embedded because people want to get the analytics where they're working. They don't want to have to be doing the swivel chair thing, going back and forth. So I think static reporting tools are in trouble. Low-end semantic layers also probably in trouble. So, the bottom line is that, and this was one of my main points of the thesis, is that convenience often beats precision. If it's much easier to use these things, you're just going to start using them. You're not going to be toiling away, building your Tableau dashboard. You're just going to be grabbing some piece of data, throwing it in there, or using, of course, MCP. We'll talk about that a bit, Model Context Protocol. But even that is not what a lot of people think it is. So accuracy is not the only metric. And we weren't always right before. I mean, we were right a lot of the time, but data in, data out. If you don't have good data going in, you won't have good analysis coming out. But the point is, faster, easier, cheaper for now. Of course, token costs are changing. Anthropic just pulled a string on that one. And there are other strings to be pulled. So be careful about those agentic workflows and how many times you're hitting. In fact, there are several companies already that are talking about how they've already burned through their entire annual budget for Claude, and it's not even halfway through the year. So there are hidden costs. You have to watch out for the token cost for sure. The good enough revolution, this is an interesting point too. So think about Wikipedia, not as good as encyclopedias, but good enough. Smartphones, the cameras on them, not as good as traditional cameras, but good enough. Streaming versus physical media, again, maybe not as good, but good enough. SaaS versus on-prem. On-prem is not going away. On-prem is going to stick around for a while, but I think AI analytics is going to follow the same path. It's easier, it's faster. It will get better as you bake better guardrails in, but as Mark has told me several times, you have to remember with large language models, a string of tokens goes in and a string of tokens comes out. What happens behind the scenes, you don't really know, at least with ChatGPT, because it's really closed AI these days. It's not open AI, which was the initial intent. It's a gigantic black box. So semantic layers under siege. Well, we keep hearing all about semantic layers and knowledge graphs. Knowledge graphs are very important. I'm still trying to wrap my head around exactly how the data from a knowledge graph makes it into a string of tokens that goes into the model. So I'm not entirely sure how that works. Hopefully we'll get one of these knowledge graph vendors to educate me on that. But in the old model is curated ontologies. Think about Calibra, think about Alation, think about all these data catalogs, great ideas, but the more dynamically you can fulfill them or fill them up, the better off you're going to be. You still need to check everything. And there's also the Open Metadata Project. Check those folks out. The Open Metadata Project, the folks from Collate are building that. Suresh Srinivas is one of the founders. He was a co-founder of Hortonworks way back when. And in fact, on a recent show, he said something that really blew my mind. This is a man who spent decades building the scaffolding to make sense of big data. So he's a structured data guy. He spent years on this. He was over at Uber running their whole data platform. So he's seen what it looks like in the real world. And we had a show with them maybe like 2 months ago. After the show, we're all chatting, and he made this comment. He said, structured data is an implementation detail. And that's when I was like, holy Christmas, this guy has spent decades building the scaffolding of structured data analysis for big data, for traditional structured data. And here he's saying, yeah, you know what? Like, we needed that to get to a certain point. But really, a lot of these constructs, they're just scaffolding designed to get you up to a point where you can look in the window way up high and see something. Scaffolding is not valuable beyond giving you the capacity to ask a question and get a good answer. So the real shift, old navigation, click through menus, new way, just tell me what matters. I mean, honest to goodness, who likes clicking through menus? Who likes the old, I always pick on Adobe Photoshop because back in the late 90s and early aughts, I mean, you went into Adobe Photoshop and you had all these menus and like literally hundreds of options underneath some of these menus and sub options and masks and filters and all these things. And it's like, good grief, you'd have to sit around and read all day manuals just to figure out how to use this stuff. It was very, very complex. Now with natural language interfaces, you can tell the thing what you want and get it back. That again, it's a huge deal. It just saves a lot of time. Yes, you may have to ask a few times. You may have to vet the answers that you get. That's just part of life, but you always had to do that. You know, one of my good buddies, Lou Simon, from here in Pittsburgh, of Optima, he made a really interesting point. He said, these large language models are a form of intelligence. People have intelligence. People come into your office, they tell you things. Usually you believe them unless you've learned to not believe someone, in which case you don't or may not. But the point is, they may not get everything right, but they have an intelligence. These systems are very interesting in being able to parse massive amounts of instruction and data and give you insights. That's why they're so compelling, and that's why they're threatening traditional business intelligence. So death of the dashboard, it's not going away. We'll have dashboards, but geez, the craze around dashboards is going to fade. It faded with embedded. Embedded analytics gets you the analytics right inside whatever tool you're using, whatever you're trying to get done. You want to get it right away. That's not new. We've had embedded analytics for 30 plus years, but now it's going to be much more significant. And I think the key takeaway here is that the dashboard will no longer be the primary discovery interface. It's still going to be there, monitoring compliance, operational status, that kind of thing. Yes, it's going to be good, but dashboards were the be all end all, and that's just not going to be the case anymore. So the rise of agentic analytics, AI doesn't just answer questions. Yeah, well, it certainly can do things. Now you have to be careful. Now we have these harnesses that allow you to do even more interesting things. A lot of stuff is going on. They write SQL. Now, they don't always get it right. There was a great story I saw on LinkedIn where someone said, yeah, we decided to use Gen AI to write our SQL queries, and 9 out of 10 times it was really good, but 1 out of 10 times it was really bad. And it was hard to figure out which time it was bad. So it's like, okay, how much time do you spend kind of juggling back and forth and understanding? And here's my general takeaway. I'm probably saying this a bit too soon in the presentation, but I think the old analytics stack is going to stick around. It's going to be augmented by all this AI stuff, but you're going to use the AI to test it, sort of your proving ground. And then when you find what you need for sure, you're going to harden it in the traditional analytics stack. So that's going to stay. It's going to continue to be hardened and governed and precise because that's what you want. That's the gold layer. You talk about the bronze, silver, gold. That's the gold. It will not go away. Data warehouses are not going to go away. But the AI is so good at summarizing things, it's suggesting actions, it finds things that you forgot about, which is what I think is so interesting. I will use it to give me a list of things if I'm going to write about a particular story subject, and it'll always include things that I had not thought of. And so that's the value of AI, is it really helps you as like a co-pilot to say, hey, don't forget about X, Y, and Z. Don't forget about the knowledge graphs. Oh, right, the knowledge graphs. So it's going to be really good for that stuff too. The evolution of the analyst. A lot of people don't understand exactly what analysts do, and they use their brains. That's the key, is an analyst is supposed to use his or her brain to understand what's happening. What do we say? 80% of time is spent manually data gathering, proofing things, building basic dashboards, SQL generation, layered menu navigation. That's all the data prep stuff historically. Now, someone like Donald Farmer will tell you data prep is an educational experience. And he's right, it is. Data prep is really good for kind of helping you understand what does your data look like. And it's usually pretty messy. Data is almost always messy. So it's good for that. But in the future, you're going to have more focus on, well, prompt engineering. It's not as cool as people thought it was. by the way, another quick tip, multiple steps, take multiple steps as you go through LLMs to get, for example, a list of things and then flesh that list out. And in the Claude world, they talk about this with the MD files, right? So you include these MD files that have instruction in them, and you have a sort of sequence of events that it does. That seems to get better answers. That seems to, for some reason, orchestrate how this thing behaves. Because the other thing to point out, once again, black box, I had Dr. Osama Fayyad on our show a couple years ago now, and he made a hilarious quote. He goes, these models, they're too big. They're not supposed to work. We don't know why they work. I'm like, all right, this is a guy who was at Yahoo during the Hadoop days years ago. He was the first chief data officer at Yahoo, and he's now running the Institute for Experiential AI, I believe it's called, out of Northeastern University in Massachusetts. So he's a pretty smart guy, pretty focused on AI, and he's saying, guys, we don't know exactly how they work because they're so dense, they're so deep, and of course they're changing all the time, and it is closed AI. So data governance important, strategic orchestration, yes. So data prep, and what do I mean by data prep? Well, at the end of the day, the LLMs do not deal well with structured data. You can't give it the rectangle, essentially. You can't, I mean, you can give it something, but it's going to use tools behind there to flatten that out to be able to convert it to a string of tokens so it can go and do its thing. So the data prep side is very interesting. Open metadata, again, pretty interesting company to look at. The folks from Simba Technologies, which now is part of Insight Software, ODBC and JDBC drivers, these are still the workhorses of data, and they'll save you a lot of time and effort. So the workflows are all going to be changing here, but data prep, getting it ready to be flattened and pushed into the model, that's what I mostly mean by data prep. And these agents, they're going to have some architecture underneath them to be able to get to the answers quickly. Now, another interesting change that we're seeing is we are a little bit more patient now with the response. It can take 20, 30, 40 seconds, even a minute for these engines to come up with their answers. And people have kind of gotten used to that now, which is an interesting reversal of the trend, right? You always wanted it fast, interactive. Right now, it's a little bit slower, but you get such bigger results, I think, when you use these things. So things like master data management need to be baked in. They need to be operational in nature. Entity resolution, pretty important stuff right there. Data quality, of course, observability is part of the new sort of modern data stack. Observability is huge, understanding what's actually happening out there. And we're learning a lot about all that. But yeah, there is a theory that garbage in, gold out can happen with the large language models. And I will say they're good at large amounts of text. Like if you take a transcript or you take a whole bunch of dirty notes that you've written and ask it to summarize, it does just create a new document, essentially. It does hallucinate, but it's surprising how good it can be at that kind of thing. But like Mark said, it does not model data. Large language models model language, which is used to describe the data, but we can't forget about the importance of the data. So retrieval advantage, context retrieval, knowledge grounding, these are all very important things to keep in mind. Semantic enrichment, trusted enterprise memory. So one of the really cool things I love about these models and using them is that now you can have layers of information being pulled in from all your calls, all your sales calls, for example, and stored. And then a senior director can sit on top of all that and ask, hey, who's got the best sales pitch right now? Again, this is for operational stuff. It's not traditional data management, but it's augmenting what you can get from the data. So you still look at the data, but then you use these tools to kind of get to the bottom of who's doing what and where. That is amazing stuff. It's going to change how business gets managed, quite frankly. So who are the ones most in trouble? Well, traditional BI vendors, dashboard-centric firms. I will say I'll pick on one company that jumped on this early. Alteryx with their magic documents was brilliant. They were early in the game to figure out how to use that stuff, and that's how these guys are going to stick around. You have to be leveraging or embracing the AI wave. You cannot hide under your desk and pretend it's not going to change things. You must embrace this stuff. So again, the pivot, this is the guys who are going to survive. They're going to focus on governance, trust, semantics. You can't say enough about semantics, but again, exactly how that gets parsed and pushed into a model, I need to learn more about that, to be honest. And workflow integration, so changing workflows. This is really going to fundamentally change how we do all kinds of things. I think you're going to see a flattening of organizational hierarchies. You're going to see people having to learn what their colleagues had done in the past. It's not going to be so easy. And that's going to be good news, because organizational silos lead to data silos, lead to application silos, lead to friction, lead to trouble. So if everyone can see what's going on across the bounds, that's good news for business. And I think that is one of the really interesting dynamic functions of all this Gen AI stuff, especially if you use it effectively. I think it's going to spell the end of the individual blowhard. Because what is a blowhard? A blowhard is someone who is a choke point, a bottleneck, someone who stops progress because they're controlling data and they're either afraid of losing control or they're just being a jerk, which does happen. And I think that the AI coming all around that is going to fundamentally change that. It's going to be easier to know what's really happening and who isn't doing what they're supposed to do if you use this stuff effectively. So the future value, well, strategic assets, data infrastructure, metadata intelligence, a lot of the stuff we talked about for years, but it's time to get rolling with it, basically. Agent governance. Mark and I went to the Boomi World just recently, and they're talking about the agent control tower. This is the new space, I can tell you that. Being able to orchestrate agents, feed them the data they need, understand what they've done, be able to kill them when they do bad things. I mean, this is a whole new world that we're going to be living in, and it's almost more reactive in a lot of ways because the agents are going to be out there doing things, so you got to stop them. It's like Kubernetes on steroids, I suppose. AI observability is going to be core. Knowledge graphs, knowledge graphs, knowledge graphs. Very, very, very important stuff. So why enterprises still need humans? Well, you know, lots of reasons. And I would argue that humans are more important now. We're the ones who will understand regulatory nuance, for example, intent. You're seeing a lot of intent conversations now. Sami Akbay of Dagent talks about intent-aware agents. They know what they're supposed to do. And think about something like GDPR. With GDPR, you're supposed to document what you want to do with that data. Well, now an LLM can read that, parse it, and then assess whether or not you're in your domain, whether or not you are in violation of something. It might be wrong, but at least you have someone to kind of help you go there. There are ethical trade-offs, make no mistake about that, and you have to prioritize, but things are changing. So new analytics architecture, emerging AI native stack. Well, yeah, operational systems, event streams, lakehouse, all that stuff is still important. And then vector database, MCP, model context protocol. That's another one worthy of really understanding and how it actually works. Because again, it's, you know, giving access up to the model of your data, but you have to be careful how you authorize things and what governance you give it. We heard all kind of crazy stuff about OpenClaw. Be careful about that stuff for sure. Who are the new big guys? Well, think about it. Think about how big OpenAI is and Anthropic now. Good grief. These companies have ridiculous valuations now. A lot of that stuff you could argue is funny money, but the other big guys are going to stick around. ServiceNow is really moving quite well. Of course, Bill McDermott, former SAP guy, he went over there. He's been the CEO for the last several years, and you can see that he has brought his moxie to the table. Databricks, you know, Snowflake, obviously interesting companies. Databricks still not profitable, which is kind of interesting for a company that has raised a lot of money and spent $1 billion on Tabular, which was a small company that built Iceberg, which is a standard now, an open source standard. Why did they do that? Ali Ghodsi, he mentioned something on his feed just the other day. If you follow him on LinkedIn, look up, he explained why he paid over $1 billion. I think it's because he got into a feud with Snowflake, but there you go. So advice for analytics vendors, how to avoid extinction, embrace conversational UX. That is probably the most important thing. Focus on trusted data. Remember that whole data stack, it's going to remain there. The AI augments all that stuff. Be careful about thinking you can replace the old stack with the AI. No, don't do that. Enable agents, move upstream. A lot of companies focus on the infrastructure these days too. And for the enterprises, invest in metadata. Again, look up open metadata, very interesting. It's open source. It's a very interesting approach they're taking to bake semantics into the data structures themselves. Still takes a lot of time. They help you automate that process. AI governance, that's a whole space now. I've seen some vendors talk about it. Pretty dicey stuff, pretty difficult to pull off, but prepare for the autonomous workflows for sure. Users in the future, probably not going to open too many dashboards, probably not going to write too many SQL queries themselves, but they can. I remember Mark said years ago, a human can always write tighter code than a machine, and that's true, but we are getting better with the machines. And the new modus operandi, ask, natural language, converse, delegate, verify. Yes, the closing slide is not no analytics. It's embedded, it's conversational, autonomous. And I like this line, the winners won't sell dashboards, they'll sell trust.